Jared and Susan and I and the team put this event together because we wanted to have the experts in the community to understand where we're coming from, right? We wanted the politicians and the pastors and the medical professionals to hear from the experts that are speaking all over the country about what's really going on in this world. So some of you got to be scratching your head. Maybe at the beginning you were a little in fear, but what we want to do is dispel some of that fear. A lot of you guys had sent in some questions to ask them. We're going to start off with some questions. This is called our Ask the Experts. If you have a ticket for the later session, or if not, then just to get a little housekeeping here. The men's restroom here, women's restroom there. There's some restrooms here, and then after we're completed, this is the way to go out right here, and then come back around to come in and check yourself in, okay? And for those of you who have reserved tickets for the afternoon, we have some seats in there reserved for you, okay? The moderator for our session is Dr. Kevin Stillwagon. So Kevin is a retired captain, a pilot for a commercial airline. He was a chiropractor. He's from a chiropractic family. He's been speaking out at the county commissioner meetings. He's been speaking out at the school boards, and he's a true patriot for our country. And we're really lucky to have him in our neck of the woods. So he's going to do the moderating of the session. So without further ado, Kevin Stillwagon.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for being here. You people are the leaders in the community. You are here because there is a significant amount of misinformation on this vaccine that's floating around, particularly dealing with its efficacy and safety. So we're going to address some of those issues today. Also, some of you are still a little fearful, and we want to try to get rid of that fear because you people are the leaders in the community. You have a definite impact on other people's lives, probably more than you think. So what we're going to do today is we're going to introduce every member of the panel. I have a brief introduction on every person, and then we are going to jump right into the questions. How many of you submitted questions online? Can I see a raise of hands? Okay. We have all of those questions, and they are before the panel right now, and they are looking those over. And we're going to try to get to most of those questions. Also, we're going to have an opportunity for you to answer a question live here today, right over at that microphone on the side. So as we are talking about the speakers, if you hear something about this speaker that maybe you want to ask, get right in line over there. And if your question is going to be answered in the list of questions, then just step back out of line and take your seat. So that's how we'll run the show. So starting from left to right, we have Attorney Jeff Childers. He represented a group of City Gainesville employees facing termination due to their refusal to take the COVID-19 vaccines. And now, after a major victory in late September, in his case representing the 250 Gainesville workers, and a victory in an appeal in June to end the mask mandate in his county, attorneys across the country are turning to him for help with similar cases. Childers is harnessing the momentum to form a coalition of attorneys from across the country interested in taking on similar fights over mask and vaccine mandates and whatever else comes next in the fight to preserve freedom. Jeff has the COVID and Coffee Army, which I belong to. And
Coffee and COVID.
Coffee and COVID. I got it backwards.
You need the coffee first.
Coffee first. Got it. And that has been very instrumental in helping us to make our voices heard in government, and it has made a significant impact in the state of Florida, and we appreciate that very much. Next, we have Dr. Robin Openshaw, and she has a Master of Social Work, former psychotherapist, Brigham Young University faculty, and a single mother of 4, and the driving force behind the greensmoothiegirl.com, which gives a wealth of knowledge on healthy plant-based diets and high vibe living and holistic wellness. She is the author of 15 books, including a couple of bestsellers. She is a very sought-after speaker, did a 6-year, 450 city international speaking tour. She has been a featured expert in more than 20 online summits, and a keynote speaker in health and professional growth events. And she has also been featured in several magazines. And thank you, Dr. Openshaw, for being here today. Dr. Larry Palevski is next. I met Larry in Kansas City for a conference several weeks ago, and we immediately connected, man. It was almost like a Vulcan mind meld. He and I think alike. He is very much into teaching and knowledge. He actually teaches holistic and integrative pediatric and adolescent medicine to parents, medical, and allied health professionals, both nationally and internationally. And I believe this is huge, because knowledge is one of the ways that we're going to get ourselves out of this mess. So thank you, Dr. Larry, for being here. By the way, all of these people's credentials are up on the screen there, and they're very, very impressive. Next, we have Dr. Robert Malone. Now, if he is not the most interesting man in the world, he certainly should be. He developed mRNA technology and knows why it is failing in this particular application, and he is not afraid to speak out about it and is not afraid to answer any questions that you may have. His credentials are really impressive. His work has resulted in over 10 patents and numerous publications, yielding about 7,000 citations for his work. He has close to 100 peer-reviewed publications and published abstracts, and just many, many citations. He's been an invited speaker in over 50 conferences all over the world. He has sat as a chairperson on numerous NIAID and Department of Defense studies, heavily involved in government action. And, you know, most of us talk about people in high places. Dr. Malone knows the people in high places. He is truly, truly an expert. Next, we have Dr. Peter Mccullough. I am absolutely amazed at your energy and stamina, sir. You are out there. You have been on major networks, just about every social media platform you can think of. He does tons of interviews, and he still has time to see patients in 2 hospitals in Texas. You're amazing. Last night, we were at an event, and I was talking to Dr. Mccullough, and he said, well, I'm double booked. I got this thing I got to do with Robert F. Kennedy now, and he took off for a few minutes and came back to the event. Just absolutely amazing. He's broadly published. He's an editor. Truly, truly an expert. It's an honor to have you here today, sir. All right, next we have Dr. Sherry Tenpenny. Yeah, she is awesome. She has been doing this for a long time. She is a osteopathic medical doctor, board certified in neuromusculoskeletal medicine. In addition, she has proficiency certification in integrative medicine. She is widely regarded as the most knowledgeable and outspoken physician on the adverse impact that vaccines can have on health. She has been a guest on hundreds of radio and national television programs, including Dr. Oz, Daystar TV, and the Today Show Australia. And she really does this a lot. In fact, her and I just did one together last week. It was awesome. She's the author of several books, including a bestseller. She was board certified in emergency medicine and worked as a full-time emergency medicine physician and the director of a level 2 trauma center. So truly another expert, and it's an honor to have you here as well. Next, we have Dr. Kerry Maday, who I had the pleasure of meeting for the first time last night. And Dr. Kerry Maday is originally from Dearborn, Michigan, and received her medical degree from Kansas City University of Medicine Medical Biosciences in 2001. She then completed her traditional internship at the Medical Center in Columbus, Georgia, and internal medicine residency at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. She served as a private clinician and a medical director of clinics in Georgia until 2015. She also served as an attending physician for the Pennsylvania College of Osteopathic Medicine, Georgia campus, where she mentored students in clinical applications of internal medicine for 8 years. She has served as a public speaker and was featured in the documentary The Marketing of Madness about the overuse of prescription psychotropic medicine. Dr. Maday now dedicates her time educating others on vaccines, nanotechnology, human rights via multiple platforms and speaking engagements. And thank you so much for being here. Next, we have Dr. Joseph Fitzgerald, another local guy. He goes by Doc Fitz to his patients and friends. He has been practicing family practice medicine in Largo and Bel Air for almost 20 years. He is triple board certified. In addition to his family practice, he is also on staff at Largo Medical Center. He is the director of Wright's Nursing Home and Oak Manor Nursing Home. He is the United States patent holder for a groundbreaking invention that will greatly impact the diagnosis of colon cancer. He spent 7 years as the physician of the PGA Tour. He is the official local physician for the Warner Brothers films, including Dolphin Tale, Magic Mike, and Spring Breakers. He volunteers with the Special Olympics and multiple local charity events. Thank you so much, Doc Fitz, for being here. All right. We are here to learn. So let's jump right in. Dr. Malone, you're first. Your question is, the mRNA vaccine technology has been under development for many years, but my understanding is that several years ago, the technology was deemed unsafe for humans due to failed animal trials. So this person's question is, and it came in online, the question is, what was seen in the animal trials, and is that indicative of what I should expect to be seeing in my patients now?
So the article that's referenced by the person writing in the inline question has to do with some research that was done in metabolic diseases, classic gene therapy with the Moderna technology. Those trials failed, as did numerous other ones for various indications, including inborn errors of metabolism and oncology from Moderna. The trial that she's referring to in the preclinical work has to do with a disease of hepatic metabolism. The lipids that are used for the mRNA delivery can be modified structurally so that, in theory, they partially target different organs. The lipids that were used in this particular study were believed to target liver. The lipids that are used so these are the fats, the cationic lipids that are used to coat the RNA. The ones that are used in the current vaccines, of course, we have 2 different vaccines with slightly different lipids. Those are both believed to target lymph nodes. That was the original logic. We now know from at least the Pfizer dossier that that is not the case. It may have been a partial targeting of lymph nodes, draining lymph nodes in the animal models, but we know from the Pfizer dossier from Japan that the lipids that are being used are not very specific to targeting lymph nodes, but that was the initial logic. The hepatic damage observed in these studies, apparently, they're not really disclosed what the results are. This is all proprietary Moderna, involved liver inflammation. Acute inflammation has been a chronic problem with any of these cationic lipid formulations since back in the day when I was first doing this work. They actually make great adjuvants because they're so inflammatory. They recruit, since we're dealing with physicians here, they typically recruit a polymorphonuclear infiltrate and that can be associated with activated polys that can be quite damaging in various organ systems, which is why they were abandoned as a core technology for gene therapy when Genzyme was investing major money in them. So in sum, the specific study that's being cited from Stat News that was a failed R&D program of Moderna of almost a decade ago now, related to an earlier formulation, and it's only partially relevant. So I hope that addresses the question, but the subsidiary kind of ancillary question, are there man-made lipid toxicities? The answer is yes. And so this gets to the core question, how much of the effects that we're observing with the adverse event profile with these vaccines is associated with the mRNA vaccines, is associated with the synthetic chemical component? How much is associated with the formulation, including the polyethylene glycol, and how much is associated with the payload, that's the spike protein that's expressed? And I think the answer is that it's still unclear because the FDA and the CDC, but particularly the FDA, did not insist that the proper studies be done prior to initiating clinical trials. So we don't really know. The honest truth is we don't know the answer. Many people have observed within the Pfizer data package that came from Japan. And just to be clear, this was Pfizer research, not Japanese regulatory research. They've observed that the lipid component differentially accumulates, particularly in the ovary, relative to testis, and in bone marrow. So then the question is that associated with any reproductive harm or risks associated with bone marrow transformation or other bone marrow effects? And the answer is it's not known because the studies weren't performed. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Dr. Malone. I appreciate that. I watched you in Ocala give a very, very detailed presentation on the lipids and how they actually are used to deliver the mRNA, so I appreciate you answering this question. Now, obviously that question came from a doctor. How many doctors do we have in the audience? Any kind of a doctor at all? Okay, fantastic. How many pastors do we have in the audience today? Okay, several pastors, that's great. How many nurses are here today? Okay, great. How many business owners do we have here today? Okay, fantastic. So you business owners that maybe have a question that's not quite as technical, start formulating these in your mind, and there's an opportunity for you to stand in front of the microphone and let her rip. How many do we have here today that are holders of a public office? Holders of public offices. Okay? All right. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for being here. That means an awful lot. Okay. The next guy on the docket is Dr. McCullough. And for Dr. McCullough, a question came in, and there was a report that came out. I believe it was the Rose Report, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but it stated that about 86% of the deaths that are reported on the VAERS system, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, are attributed to the vaccine, and there could be no other explanation. Can you expand upon that and how they came up with this, and is that actually true?
Well, thanks for the question. Let me just say in context, I'm a physician in practice, but I'm also equally involved in research. So I've chaired committees that adjudicate death and adjudicate other endpoints, and I've chaired data safety monitoring boards which actually interpret that data and make the decision on when to stop a research program for excess mortality. And in fact, I've done that for very large programs in conjunction with the US FDA, even with second evaluation committees in backup. So I work with some of the best statisticians in the world in doing this type of work. So the adjudication of death takes effort because it's really hard when someone dies to go back and try to figure out what exactly happened. And there is a very low rate of autopsy overall in the world and in the United States, and very low in COVID-19. In fact, many institutions have rules of no autopsies for fear of spread of the virus. Having said that, on 3 occasions now, the US CDC has put on the website, just as a simple sentence, that all the deaths have been reviewed in the VAERS system, and according to CDC and FDA doctors, none are related to the vaccine. None, categorically. Okay, that includes sudden collapse right in the vaccine center, things where people have been videoing this. And so immediately there's a concern, right? So the CDC and FDA are the stakeholders. They are actually sponsoring the vaccine program. In research, we never have the people sponsoring the program be the ones to objectively look over death or other non-fatal outcomes because of bias, right? Because the CDC and FDA have said, listen, they've been told execute this program. So we need an external body of experts to, in a sense, with no conflicts of interest, to be able to fairly do this. That's the reason why we set up data safety monitoring boards and clinical event committees. And in the registrational trials of the vaccines before they received the emergency use authorization, they had data safety monitoring boards and critical event committees. So they actually had the right structures coming out of the trials. But once we got into the US program, we didn't have the structures there. And so the most alarming thing about the US vaccine program is death. There's no doubt about it. You can't take it back. I mean, everyone agrees. That's most. And on January 22nd, we were at 186 deaths. That was already beyond the limit of what we thought would occur in the program. We in general get about 278 million shots a year of different vaccines, and the system does receive death reports that come in. We know from a paper by Meisner and colleagues several years ago that about 86% of the reports occur from a doctor, a nurse, the pharmaceutical company, somebody concerned that the product actually was related to the event, the death. About 14% come in from the patients themselves. And so when this narrative, the very first time the CDC said none of the deaths were reported to the vaccine, we were already at about 1,600 deaths. So we were way beyond any threshold of comfort. And so the paper that I quote is actually by Scott McLachlan at Queen's University in London. I just checked before we started. And McLachlan got the VAERS data and also got the yellow card data. So we actually worked from several systems to show internal consistency. But within VAERS, at the time, there was about 1,600 deaths. I think it was April 11th was the cutoff. They took a random sample of 250 that had complete enough vignettes to analyze. They had two separate reviewers. They actually coded the vignettes regarding certain checkpoints of, did they have enough information around the death? And then they went ahead and adjudicated, was there a cause? And so this is important. So what McLachlan identified is that in 14% of the cases, there was an obvious cause that had nothing to do with the vaccine, meaning, a car accident that happened, or something else that was just completely unrelated, or there was some other terminal illness. That meant 86% of the time there was no other explanation. They didn't put a causality with respect to mortality. But then a second paper came in from Weiler and colleagues from Oslo, Norway, in nursing homes, where they actually had the charts, and the nursing home residents received the vaccine. So they had 100 nursing home residents who received the vaccine and who died shortly afterwards. And in the Weiler analysis, the doctors did the same type of thing. They had two separate viewers, and they had to agree. They came up with 41% had no other explanation. They had gotten the vaccine, and in fact, the death happened. So we know from one final analysis from Rose about timing. So in general, this is held true. 50% of these deaths occur within 48 hours of the shot, and that 80% occur within a week. They're very tightly temporally related. The same relationship exists within the VAERS system, the yellow card system, and what's called the UDRA system in the UK. And in fact, the non-fatal events is interesting. In the McLachlan paper, which was April 11th, they cut this off, they were already seeing a signal for myocarditis, believe it or not. The myocarditis story didn't break until June. I just realized that in the McLachlan paper, they were already seeing that. So in summary, when we try to assess causality, because we never really know, we use what's called inferential thinking. And the epidemiological criteria we use is called the Bradford-Hill criteria. And the criteria say, do we have a biological mechanism of action that's plausible? And in this case, it's generation of the spike protein, which we know is damaging to the body and could be fatal. So we have that. Do we have a temporal relationship? Is it related in time? Very strongly related in time. Is it a large signal? Is it just a few deaths and this could all be random, or is it a big signal? The answer is it's a big signal. Is it internally consistent? So within VAERS, is it related to other things that could lead death, like a heart attack, a stroke, myocarditis, etc.? Yes. And then the last, is it externally consistent? Are we seeing it in some other data set completely separate from VAERS? Yes, yellow card and UDRA. So as an epidemiologist, I would conclude that a portion of the deaths, and it may be a significant proportion of the deaths, are indeed caused by the vaccine. And I would use that assessment, for instance, in a court of law. So that's my answer.
Thank you very, very much for that detailed, and very easy to understand answer. Thank you so much. Can you pass the mic to Dr. Sherry Tenpenny? Because I stole the microphone from that table. So, your online question, Dr. Tenpenny. What can we do to help those people who have taken the vaccine and say they have no symptoms because they believe they have done something good for the planet? Is there a remedy for lessening the bodily damage, and when will it work to reverse diminishing bodily immunity? And then there's a second part to the question. Does small doses of chlorine dioxide help at all?
Well, I've been doing, talking about, writing about, speaking about problems associated with vaccines for 21 years. I have a personal collection of over 17,000 articles, links and full-text articles to only peer-reviewed literature showing problems associated with vaccines. And that's pretty much the whole childhood schedule and the adult-related vaccines too, things like pneumonia shots and shingle shots, adult flu shots, things like that. And these are only pulled from peer-reviewed medical literature. So the body of literature that's out there that is being ignored by the conventional medical community is very substantial. And ever since I've been talking about problems associated with vaccines, I've always said, once you vaccinate, you can't unvaccinate. And this, with the mRNA technology through the Pfizer and the Moderna shot, and the injection of the double-stranded DNA through the J&J shot, is doubly true. That once you have injected that technology into your body, and you have a recipe that formulates a spike protein by running through the ribosomes to create a spike protein, and we've got B cells that are now sensitized, dendritic cells that are sensitized. We've got CD8 cells that are now been sensitized. Once you've vaccinated, you can't unvaccinate. To my knowledge, at this point in time, there is no commercially available test for spike proteins. I mean, you can do it in the laboratory, but if there's 100 people in here, you've all been vaccinated, you can't go to the lab and get a blood test done to see what your spike protein level is, how high it is, or how long it lasts in the circulation. We do know that it globs up the microcirculation in heart muscle. You know, I've identified 40 mechanisms of injury of how these COVID shots can make you sick and possibly kill you, and it's all referenced back to the peer-reviewed medical literature. And now that we know for sure, and I think there was another question, maybe I'm getting ahead of my questions here, down the road, that, you know, that we've always been taught in immunology that DNA goes to messenger RNA that goes into making a protein, and that doesn't go in reverse. Well, now we found out otherwise, that it can go in reverse, and not only that the spike protein really does cross into the nucleus, can get into the chromosomes, and once it gets into the chromosomes, it causes a disruption of that chromosome. And in addition to that, it blocks the repair mechanisms. It doesn't allow the BRCA1 and the 53BP1 enzymes to go in and repair those disrupted genetic properties. So these really are genetic modification technologies. They can and do go in and permanently and irreversibly change your genetics. Now it's sort of like, now that we know that they block the repair mechanisms, it's sort of like if you had a fire going on in your kitchen and your kitchen stove, and the fire department shows up and says, hey, I'm here to help, and they say, no, thank you, go away. We're not here to no, thank you. So now we blocked that. So I predict and I assess that in the future, one of the additional mechanisms of injury of how these shots can make you sick or kill you, you're going to see a big uptick in cancer, which we're already seeing. Dr. Ryan Cole has talked about the big uptick in endometrial cancers. I have several urologists who've told me that they've had slow-growing, indolent prostate cancer patients that suddenly they've gone into metastatic stage 4, not treatable cancers, because we've lifted the lid off of the things, the CD8 cells that left that in suppression. So can you, once you've been vaccinated, can you unvaccinate? It's my personal and professional opinion, you can't. You couldn't do it with a measles shot. You couldn't do it with a flu shot. You couldn't do it with a pneumonia shot. You certainly can't do it with these shots. But are there things you can do to like improve your just overall health? And I'm going to talk a lot about that in when I do it this afternoon. But you can detox your body. It's always good to make yourself healthier. Get rid of white sugar, white flour, white rice, white homogenized cow's milk. Take the right set of supplements and things that you need that you can take. And it's always better to make your body healthier overall, but you can't undo the damage. It's, and it was all done by free will, which I will talk about later this afternoon too. Nobody went door to door at your house and put a gun to your head or your kids or your animal and said, take this shot or you're dead. People chose to take that shot either out of fear or out of convenience. And that's pretty much what my talk is going to be about this afternoon. And that, to me, the real solution to this problem is a spiritual one, not a physical one. So you can't just take the right supplement, the right detox, the right bath, the right, the right tea, the right this, the chlorine dioxide, any of those things. You can always make yourself a little bit healthier, but once you've vaccinated with these shots, there's no going back.
Thank you, Dr. Tenpenny. I appreciate that very detailed answer. And for bringing up the fact that there is nuclear involvement, the nucleus of the cell. Yep.
And I've been saying that from the beginning and got kind of raked over the coals
on
the mainstream literature, but it's like I read a whole lot of things that a whole lot of other people don't. And I've been doing it for 21 years. And like I said, if you go to tenpennyresearchlibrary.com, it's free. All you have to do is register. It's a really robust search in there that you can do a 2-layer search of MMR and autoimmune disease. You can find out what sort of articles come up from that. These are all links to abstracts or links to peer-reviewed literature or links to what's available out there on the internet. We didn't take anybody's information and steal it and put it in our library. This is all available out in the public domain. We just did the work for you to pull all the bullets into the right place. I've been building this since 2003. Quite honestly, I've probably put over $100,000 into it. And I build it for times such as these, that nobody has to go out and blindly put into DuckDuckGo anti-vax article, because you won't find anything. I have a full-time researcher that's worked for me since 2003, almost 30 hours a week, combing the medical literature, pulling this out and putting it into a pot of where you can go and find it already done for you. And the reason I'm kind of putting a plug in here for this is because this has been built for a time such as these, and everybody here can use it. It's free. All you have to do is just register for the account, and if you have any trouble with the research, my research assistant Cindy is willing to help anybody who's a journalist, who an article, a public official, a doctor, anybody to try to find your stuff. She will get in there and help you dig it because she's built it from scratch.
That is amazing. So there is so much available to you online while we still have it. So make use of it.
It's Tenpenny, my last name, TENPENNY, research library.com, no spaces, tenpennyresearchlibrary.com.
Okay, Dr. Maday, you're next. I heard you speak in Kansas City, and you talked about something called saRNA, which is a little different than messenger RNA. So can you talk about that a little bit? And if you have time, maybe talk to us about what you're seeing under the microscope.
Sure. So I was able to view some documents by one of the 3 manufacturers. I'm not allowed to give more information than that, where I was educated that one of the manufacturers has been using 3 different RNAs in their product. When and where this is happening, I don't know, but one of them is called saRNA, Self-Amplifying Rna. So what does that mean? It means they can use a small amount of RNA, and it's self-amplifying indefinitely, because whenever you're using RNA, there's a start codon and a stop codon. And that's very important because you don't want something to work indefinitely. That's not a very good idea. So they took the stop codon out. So when the replication starts, there is no stop button. Okay, so this is being used in the research, and we are still part of the research experiment, right? Everybody knows that? So part of the research, which is ongoing, is being used. When and where, I do not know that. This is important to know because when something starts and doesn't stop, well, things can happen in the body, right? So the self-amplifying also has the ability to have a delayed reaction, meaning maybe it doesn't start for 1 day, a week, a year, we don't know. It's very important to know that. And what can trigger it is unknown as well. So some of these actually also use vectors. Does everybody know what a vector is here? Yeah. So for instance, the Johnson & Johnson and AstraZeneca, they use an adenovirus vector, which is a cold vector. What they do is they kind of carve out the genetic inside of that organism, and then they put in their genetic material, and so they let that cold virus go and infect you, okay? And so it dumps its genetic material inside of you. That's how they do the delivery method. And so these actually can use vectors. One of the things that I was very upset about, that people should know, that we need to investigate this, that one of the manufacturers, when they were using the saRNA, they were using a vector. The vector is a Venezuelan equine encephalitis vector. So what does that mean? It's a horse vector. It's a horse virus that can inflame the brain. So usually when we use a vector, we use a benign one, like the adenovirus. It's a cold vector, a cold virus, sorry. So when they are making this, I'm not making it, they have a big vat, let's say, and they have a lot of the viruses in there, and they're trying to carve out the inside. Well, it's not a perfect science. So perhaps 1 or 2%, or who knows what is their variable, will be the original wild-type virus. But that's okay, because let's say you get that original virus inside of you. You just got the cold virus. That's okay. But they're using a horse virus that can inflame the brain that is transmissible. It's interspecies. What if 1 or 2% of that is in the batch, in the lot? And what if that gets integrated into the genome? Would you produce it indefinitely? The problem is we're using Frankenstein science. We're using science that has never before been unleashed on the population of us, humanity. And this is an alarm call by all of us saying, this is not good science. This cannot be used on us and our children without somebody overseeing this. And obviously our government officials, our international groups have failed us. So that means it's up to us, it's our duty to stand and unite and say, we say no more. We do not comply. Unfortunately, I have a gag order. I can't tell you the manufacturer. I've been told I cannot, but I can verify that this was a chain of custody of a document that came from the headquarters in New York. And so I can verify that many people saw this document with me. Just so you know, there's 3 different RNAs that this company is using. One is a regular RNA, a regular messenger RNA. That one actually goes into the body and lets the body know everything's okay. In my words, I call it the Trojan horse. It allows the other RNAs to take effect. The second is a modified messenger RNA. We're all aware of that one, right? It's genetically modified. And that one actually has the issues of suppressing your immune checkpoints. It's doing that so that it can get its material inside of the cell. The problem is if you're suppressing immune checkpoints, then other things can happen because we need our immune checkpoints. That's what protects us from cancers and other infections, et cetera. And how long does that last is unknown. Again, we're in the middle of a big research experiment. And then the third, so you're knocking out the defenses. And then the third thing was that saRNA that obviously could have disastrous results on us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maday. We're going to probably have the opportunity later to get to the second part of that question, which is what you are actually visualizing when you look at this stuff. No, not right now. We're going to get through the whole panel first, and then we'll move on to that. Doc Fitz, you're a hero, man. You are. You started treating people right away.
Yes, sir.
And that's what a doctor is supposed to do. So tell us how that went for you.
Well, my beautiful Turkish wife said we're not closing the shop. No, she's sitting over there. And we have a very large practice, and she runs both of them. And we got together as a team, my wife and our 20-plus employees. And I have a video up on Pure Life MediSpa Facebook, the only one that got left up because I've been destroyed. March 30th, 2020, Pure Life MediSpa Facebook, where the French study came out, 79 out of 80 patients lived with the hydroxychloroquine zithromaxine protocol. I've got bad asthma. Our son Donovan has bad asthma, so I was on this right away. So I started taking hydroxy every day. We never missed a day, and all of our girls, to their credit, all of our employees, I said, look, this is like a SARS. This could be deadly. None of you have to be here. Not one of our nurses went home. They're the real, not one. And we started from day one with that protocol out of France, and it's up on that video where we were trying to help everybody, saying, please, there's something that we can do, and it's old. And I luckily screenshot the Virology Journal from August 22nd, 2005, which will be part of my lecture, that hydroxychloroquine acts as a vaccine and a cure, from the NIH, known since 2005, which got shredded from the internet. So luckily I screenshot it. So we've been employing that protocol from the very first day. Quest is our main lab. I never did a nasal swab. I'm a medical technologist. I'm a lab rat that became a doctor. So your booger has corona in it. That's not, so we started drawing the blood. We started doing antibodies from the first day, knowing the antibodies would be valuable. So we never did a nasal swab ever. We always started looking for the antibodies immediately because, like I said, I'm a medical technologist that became a doctor. And we've had incredible success. Our stats are easily proven by Quest. #1 in the state of Florida for not just volume, but treating patients successfully. 3,700 plus patients, 4 hospitalizations, no deaths, and no intubations.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Can't wait to hear from you later. Okay, Jeff Childers, you're next. Your question is very tricky because you're an attorney. So now that Comirnaty has supposedly been FDA approved, I don't believe it is, but maybe you can comment on that. How are they legally able to extend the EUAs of the other products, Moderna and J&J, and also still make these available and enforce them?
Is this a trick question?
Yes, sir. Not a trick question, just a hard question for a very knowledgeable attorney. Let her rip.
Hello. Okay, can you guys hear me in the back? Before I start, can I ride down the slide? Because I've been looking at it this whole time. All right, maybe later. Hello?
I want to see you take a ride on that thing later. Absolutely.
It looks like fun. It's really high.
Try to hold that thing closer to your mouth. Let's see how that goes.
How about this? Hello? Okay. Well, so there's been a ton of discussion about this topic, right? And this is probably the #1 question I get from other attorneys who call me and want to help, and they're like, hey, why don't you go after this EUA thing, because Comirnaty's not available, and we all know it, and nobody's even saying that it will be available, that you can get it anywhere. They're not even saying when it will be available. Maybe someday, who knows? The FDA approved Comirnaty conditionally, so it's not even full approval. It stated in the approval letter that the Comirnaty product was very similar to the EUA product, but legally distinct.
But not the same.
Legally distinct. And that's all that matters to us. And so then they went ahead, and this is a feature of a lot of the lawsuits in the military cases right now. Because service members have additional rights to EUA vaccines. They can only be made to take them with informed consent. And I believe that and this is me reading between the lines, but I believe that the reason that they approved it when they did was because of the military mandate. And so it gave them a talking point, right? Why hasn't the FDA just approved all the vaccines? Can do it anytime it wants. We've seen that. The FDA, if the leaders of the FDA don't agree, then they get new leaders. So the reason has to do with a whole bunch of liability issues, right, and the timing of when they get approval. But don't worry, these vaccines will be approved by the FDA once the regulatory steps have been completed, and once they've gotten the childhood vaccines fully approved. We'll probably likely see all 3 vaccines get approval. So the EUA argument, as a legal argument, has always been a little bit of a red herring. I mean, it's absolutely correct legally. These EUA vaccines cannot be mandated by anybody under all applicable law. But now they've got one that they can point to and say it's approved, and they're just using that as a talking point, right? A Trojan horse to smuggle in the EUA vaccines until they get past the liability issues. And I'm forecasting what's going to happen in the future, which is always risky, but I've been right 90% of the time so far on predicting their legal moves. So what's going to happen is, and not only that, but they can issue those approvals anytime they want. All right, so if they're about to lose in court somewhere on this EUA issue, what's going to happen? Yeah, well, they'll issue whatever regulatory approval they need to defeat the case, right? Which is why I've never been particularly interested in chasing that around, because they control the levers of legal approval, okay? So all the people who complain about that issue are 100% correct. What they're doing is illegal, just like the eviction mandate or the eviction ban is illegal. The Supreme Court struck it down twice, and they're still trying to find ways to do it. Right? The people who are running the show right now are not in good faith. Right? A good faith lawyer, I mean, good lawyers don't push issues that they know are wrong, even if they could find some kind of loophole or tricky way to do it or a way to reword things and whatever. Those are the kind of lawyers that they make the TV shows about, right? Like in Breaking Bad, Saul. Those kind of lawyers are the ones who play those kinds of games. But those are the kinds of lawyers that are in charge right now. And so it's all word games, and and I say that with all disrespect to the people who are playing those word games. And hello, testing. Oh, thanks a lot. And I don't think there's a great conspiracy about it. It's just them reading the words in these regs and in the statutes and trying to find tricky ways to thread the needle through the language. Just like with the OSHA mandate, right? Everybody predicted, even before they saw it, that it was not going to withstand review. So why even do it? And those lawyers spent all that time to produce 600 pages that got, enjoined immediately the first time a court took a look at it. So all that is a long way of answering a short question, which doesn't have a satisfactory answer. But in reality, the fight isn't at this EUA level, because if they start to lose, they'll just approve them, right? Unfortunately. So we got to beat it a different way.
Okay, and I'm sure you'll talk more about that later this afternoon. Thank you so much. Okay, Dr. Robin Openshaw. So, what can you tell us about what a person can do nutritionally during this time of supposed pandemics and epidemics, or whatever you want to call them? What should we be doing?
So that's a great question. It reminds me of how yesterday on my Telegram group I said, okay, I'm driving Dr. Kerry Maday over to the event. I'm not going to pepper her with all you guys' questions, but I'll take the best one. And the one that I asked Kerry was, okay, so we all have to be around people who just got jabbed. And I don't know about you, but first time I sat next to somebody and 30 minutes into the conversation learned that they just got the J&J jab, that night I broke out in hives from here to my ankles that didn't go away for 3 weeks. So we've all heard these questions, thousands of them. Luckily, the answer to the question is really related to the fact that I believe the 4 years I spent in bed after getting a flu jab that I was required to get to work on a psychiatric hospital was one of the greatest blessings in my life. 4 years is a lot, and I didn't start talking about that till 2 weeks ago. So I got out of being a clinical psychologist at some point because I was so busy helping detoxify people. But I was telling Kerry last night that I didn't start talking about the 4 years I spent in bed till 2 weeks ago for 2 reasons. I've had to sit with it and realize why I didn't talk about it till 2 weeks ago. And one of them was shame. I was a young mom. And that's, what we care about most as mothers is being a good mother. And a good mother doesn't park her kids in a room, shut the door with a bunch of library books, and sleep from 3 to 6 in the afternoon, which is what I did for years. In fact, I've never discussed it with my children until one of them came to visit me a couple weekends ago. And I asked her if she remembered that, and she did. And I sat there and cried. So that's one reason that I didn't discuss it. But the other is that I thought that people would think I was lying or crazy. And so that's what's happening now to our vaccine injured, is they might look okay, but they're not okay. Luckily, what I did for 4 years is become completely obsessed with human detoxification and studying the great clinicians and researchers in the science of human detoxification. And a lot of medical doctors will make fun of you, and a lot of medical doctors made fun of me and said, that's what you have a liver for, that's what you have kidneys for. Even your skin is an organ of elimination. The lymphatic system, well, they all work together, and sometimes they get backed up. And so luckily, the reason it's a blessing in disguise is that what I learned from the 4 years that I was in bed, reading books this fat with hundreds of references at the end, many of which I would chase down, to put together what I was going to do when I was no longer breastfeeding and I could actually get the energy to do the thing, radically changed my life. In fact, in my 40s, now a single mom of 4 tweens, I spoke in 450 cities, which is not something that you do if you're sick, right? So that sick, that desperately ill in my late 20s and early 30s, to 450 cities speaking tour in my 40s, I hope that that gives you some hope that you can detoxify. You cannot unjab yourself. Dr. Tenpenny is exactly right. But we have to, the shrink in me is going to come out here. We have to meet people where they are. 165 million Americans, including some people you love, maybe even some people who live under your roof, did this thing. And they have to get well. And so the 2 things that I learned that I then put into play that got me well and keep me well at 54, 2 things are: 1, detoxifying twice a year, a committed detoxification. Now, and this is very biblical. Some people will see the simplicity of the way and turn away. But some people, who's motivated? Who doesn't gripe when we detoxify them? Because we've detoxified 16,000 people. I didn't tell them why I was sick and why my little boy was sick and why we did the detox, because I didn't want to deal with the gaslighting. Now, in the last 2 weeks, I'm talking about why I was sick. Because now there's a growing number of people, which I think is very exciting, who are aware of what's in that stuff they're injecting us with. This isn't new, that there have been sick people, hundreds of thousands of them all over the country. And Dr. Tenpenny's been trying to wake people up for 21 years. My kids were sick before then. It was Neil Z. Miller and Dr. Randall Neustatter, whose books I read, followed the references, learned that other first world countries were not injecting our kids with 72 injections by the time they were 18. And many of the things I read gave me the courage to stand up to the guys in the white coat. Later, I earned a white coat, and I realized, oh, these people with white coats, they just put their pants on one leg at a time. We're really not any smarter than anybody else. We may have done some research in some certain things, but when you're 25, when you're a young mom, you don't stand up to the doctors, generally speaking. So I'm so grateful to all those who are waking people up, but the two things that got me well is I detoxify twice a year. I'm super rigorous about it. And the detox that we do is related to the work of, give me a little shout if you've heard of these guys or you've studied their work. This is before the marketers came in. Okay, these are the guys who were not getting rich, but they were detoxifying 10,000 people, like Bernard Jensen. Anyone? Ann Wigmore? Anyone? Richard N. Anderson, ND. You may not know him, but Arise and Shine, Cleanse. Anyone? I could go on. Dr. Jack Tips, Dr. Wheelwright. I started studying the people who were actually getting people well. And I did what they taught. And the things that I did are things that most people wouldn't do. Then when I started detoxifying people, I found people got too sick from what I was doing. I had the advantage of being in my late 20s. Okay, a lot of the people I detox now are 60. They're way more toxic. So we developed a protocol that just about anybody can handle. It's pretty hardcore though. And we do it twice a year. My husband, if you met him, he'll be back a little later today. When he does a detox, he loses 8 pounds in 2 days. Well, you can take a look at the guy. He has an 8-pack. He has no fat on him. Why is that? That is your body with trillions of angry, red, inflamed cells healing in 2 days, enough to release enough dirty fluids. That's not fat, 8 pounds in 2 days. And people will tell you, well, it's just losing water weight. No, it's cells, inflamed cells healing and releasing dirty fluids you needed to get rid of. Your body will heal so fast if you give it the right materials that oxygenate and alkalize and are high in fiber and are nutrient dense, and you're not eating, as was mentioned before, white sugar, white flour, all the bread, no coffee on the detox, no alcohol. Okay, and you know who doesn't whine? Because we have to support these people. Your doctors, here's what people do when they get sick. And it's just sort of like the definition of insanity. The same people who made them super sick, they go back to those people trying to ask them to get them well. So that's one thing. I mean, I did do the thing. I did get the jab, and I spent 4 years in bed for it. But what I didn't do is go back and ask those guys to get me well and give me some more drugs. So detoxifying twice a year. And then the other thing is just shifting to a 90-95% plant-based whole foods diet. I don't eat a perfect diet. I don't eat a perfect diet now. I'm not as careful now as I was then. But when you get well, it makes you really committed and you don't feel like you're being punished. When you give up salt and sugar and animal products and coffee and all the things you give up in the detox as you watch massive accelerated healing. So, switching to a whole foods, mostly plant-based diet and detoxification. All of you are going to have a responsibility to help a family member. This thing is a catastrophe. 165 million Americans, if you believe that number, whatever, is a big number. You know and love these people, and you can help them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Robin. Dr. Larry Palevski, should we really be worried about kids getting COVID?
I have to clean up the rear, right? I'm the last one.
Go for it.
Okay, so thank you for this opportunity to be here and speak in front of you. When the COVID illness first came out, the predominant symptoms we saw in adults were hypoxia, so low oxygen levels, blood clots, loss of taste, loss of smell, fatigue, fever, weakness, tight chests, and a dry cough. We also saw blood clots throughout the body, whether it was COVID toes, strokes, heart attacks. And miraculously enough, we barely saw any of these symptoms in the pediatric population. But somewhere along the line, kids started developing this multi-system inflammatory syndrome, which was organ failure, practically. And somehow the medical profession forgot that any other pediatrics could be practiced and associated all of those symptoms with the SARS-CoV-2 virus. And they did it using a PCR test that is not valuable to make a diagnosis of a viral infection. But what they also found was when kids had these multi-system inflammatory syndromes, upwards of 50% of the children in those hospitals that were getting sick had a negative PCR test. But in general, children never really progressed with the classic COVID symptoms. It was predominantly seen in adults, and those adults with the greatest comorbidities and the elderly were the ones to predominantly suffer severe consequences or even death. We know from the data that 99.997% is the recovery rate of COVID-19 in the pediatric population. That means death is as close to zero as you're going to get. Now, what's interesting is that in 2020, it was established that the thing that was causing the symptoms of COVID-19 was the spike protein. And the spike protein was found to cross the blood-brain barrier and cause neurological issues. It was causing lung issues, liver issues, heart issues, blood issues, male and female reproductive issues, and kidney issues. And so somewhere along the line, we decided that it would be okay to give people a shot that would give them the ability to manufacture the spike protein. And so that's exactly what we would be doing if we continued this into the pediatric population. We've already done it in the majority of people who've gotten the messenger RNA and potentially the vector shots. But essentially, we are creating COVID-19 by giving these shots, because we are giving people the ability to manufacture the very spike protein that is known to be causing the illness that we started to see back in late December of 2019, early of 2020. The other thing that's interesting is that if we look at the technology, nowhere in the history of vaccinations has this technology ever been used to demonstrate the reduction or the elimination of any infectious disease. I'll say that again. Nowhere in the history of vaccinations have we ever established that these technologies effectively reduce or eliminate an infectious disease. We have no precedents, no historical precedents, that any of these technologies would reduce any infection at all. Yet, we automatically call it a vaccine because they say it is a vaccine. It takes 7 to 10 years, sometimes 15 years, for a vaccine to actually be brought to market, to be established as an injection that does the 5 following things. Gives you antibody protection, gives you antibody production against the virus. That antibody production then protects you from getting the virus. It reduces your seriousness of disease, hospitalizations, or death. It reduces your carriage of the virus, and it reduces your transmission of the virus. Before the shot was actually pushed into the public, it was significantly established that they didn't know if this shot would give us antibodies to the virus. They didn't know if it would give us antibody protection, therefore stop us from getting the viral illness. They never tested for whether or not it would reduce hospitalizations, severity of disease, or deaths. And they established that they didn't know if it would stop us from carrying the virus or even transmitting the virus. And here we are 11 months later, and the same is true. It does not stop carriage, it does not stop transmission, it has not been slowing down hospitalizations or deaths or severity of illness. It's actually been giving us the illness. And it does not protect us against an infection. And so essentially, because of those 5 things, it cannot be established as a vaccine. And because it's a technology that's never been utilized in history to reduce or eliminate an infectious disease, it still cannot be considered a vaccine. But what's interesting, in the pediatric literature, back in June of this year, an oral blood thinner was approved for the pediatric population, which we found very interesting. An oral blood thinner was all of a sudden approved for pediatrics. What's also interesting is that we started to see signs all over the place that pediatric strokes happen. And so there was a normalization that strokes are okay in pediatrics. They happen, when in fact they're very rare. There was a normalization that children would need blood thinners all of a sudden. But what was also interesting is that the formulation for the pediatric population contained 1/3 of the quantity of the adult shot of the mRNA, but it also contains a different buffer in it called tromethamine. And just reading what tromethamine is it stabilizes the acid in the blood, but it also is a stabilizer of heart attacks. So again, with expectation that they know from the shots that adults have been getting that they've been getting heart attacks, they've been getting blood clots, they've been getting strokes. And somehow we're going to hit it off at the pass by giving a product inside the shot that would stabilize heart attacks if they were to happen in children. What I find most interesting is that when children have a natural measles infection, we never medically recommend that they get a measles vaccine. If they have a natural chickenpox infection, we would never recommend that they get the chickenpox vaccine. Unprecedented in history, we are recommending a shot even if the children had the illness or were exposed to the illness, which does not make medical sense. What we're seeing in the adult population is from the shots. If we listen to VAERS, if we believe VAERS, and if we recognize that VAERS may only account for less than 1% of all reports that are truly adverse events, we're seeing cardiac issues, blood clots, male and female reproductive system issues, upticks in cancer, kidney disease, neurological problems, lung and liver issues. In the pediatric population, the higher teens and the early 20s, we were seeing massive increases in myocarditis, which is an inflammation of the heart, along with pericarditis. And it was completely ignored. We saw teenagers die soon after the shot, and it was ignored. And the last thing I want to say is that for millennia, we have addressed the unvaccinated as the pariahs. We've addressed the unvaccinated as unclean. We've addressed the unvaccinated as those who are responsible for transmitting and starting any infectious outbreak. But in order for that to be true, we would have to prove that by getting vaccinated, you no longer can or do carry or transmit the germ against which you've been vaccinated. And that science has never been done or proven. And so we walk around very much believing that the unvaccinated are the disease. They are the problem, and they are carrying something specific. And when President Biden said we need to protect vaccinated workers from unvaccinated coworkers, he was pushing forth the belief that, number one, vaccinated workers aren't protected if they got the vaccine, which is essentially what he was saying. We need to protect vaccinated workers, but they're already protected if they got the vaccine, aren't they? But then he said we have to protect them from the unvaccinated coworker, which means that somehow the vaccine doesn't work, but that the unvaccinated are carrying a germ that they would then pass to everyone else. And again, that is not based in any science. And we have got to start talking about the fact that unvaccinated do not spread germs because vaccinated do not stop carrying germs or transmitting just by the very nature of receiving a vaccine.
All I can say is boom. All right. We're going to get to the questions in line. You can state your name and your background if you want to. You don't have to. You can address the entire panel or an individual member. So go for it.
Okay. My name is Bob Buell. I'm not a doctor, but my wife is. So she answers all of my medical questions for me when all these come up. Mine is more of a, I guess, a business/legal type question. Knowing what's happening with vaccine mandates being held up from OSHA standpoint, and what's happening here in Florida with the new law that just got signed. I have a couple of concerns about individual companies. If they decide on their own, without having an OSHA mandate, to still go forward with mandates, is there a way that we can at least threaten to hold them accountable for all of the coming adverse reactions to the vaccines if they're mandating it? Or does the at-will nature of our employment prohibit that? And sort of a secondary one, if you talk specifically about medical clinics, I've heard it argued that any medical clinic might be considered a federal contractor because of Medicare, Medicaid type payments. And that seems to be false to me, but they may attempt that as well if for some reason there's not enough liability heaped on the companies. They may, since they've already been receiving the federal money, that may be inclining them to continue forward attempting to mandate even when there's not really a law that says they have to.
Thank you for your question. It looks like Jeff Childers is locked and ready to go.
It sounds like this one's for me. And there's like 6 questions in there. So I'm going to try to like elegantly package it up for you. And this is topical, right? This is what everybody's wondering about. Now that we have the new law in Florida, what does this mean? How is this going to play out? That kind of thing. Let me just address the very first part of your question. Just forget about anybody taking responsibility for vaccine injuries. There are so many layers of liability protection now. And it's bordering on the absurd, right? So OSHA said that they're taking COVID infections and vaccine injuries off the mandatory reporting list. But at the health department, isn't that a mandatory reporting disease? I mean, the surveillance stuff, I mean, I don't know how that works, but so you got one branch of government where it's required to be reported, but another one where, you know, and how does that just, never mind. So the Florida the lawmakers who came up with the language for the bills did something very clever, right? They didn't just ban vaccine mandates. And a lot of people come up to me and they're like, Jeff, they pound the table, why didn't they just ban the vaccine mandates? It would have been a disaster. It would have been a disaster to do that, because you would have put all these businesses in the crosshairs between the state law and the federal law, right? So for example, you've got hospitals who get, I don't know, 50, 60% of their total revenue from Medicare reimbursements. And Medicare is saying, if you don't do this vaccine mandate, we're going to cut off your Medicare reimbursements. Now, the state can't order Medicare to pay those reimbursements. Florida doesn't have that authority. So if Florida tells the hospital you can't do the mandate, and Medicare says we're not going to pay you if you don't do the mandate, what does the hospital do? Same thing for federal contractors, right? So you got a federal contractor, and we have a lot of those in Florida. Some of our largest private companies in Florida are federal contractors, defense industries, things like that. We got a lot of them. And the Biden executive order says if you don't do this mandate, we're not renewing your contract. Well, Florida can't order the federal government to renew that contract. So if Florida banned vaccine mandates and this company, this defense contractor can't do the vaccine mandate, the federal government says, fine, we're just not going to renew the contract. And don't you think they would like to hurt Florida's economy that way? Yeah. So they did something really clever. They said, if you're going to do a mandate, then you have to grant one of the following exemptions if the employee asks for it. And there's like 6 or 7 of them. It covers almost any conceivable circumstance. You can volunteer to wear PPE. You can volunteer to do periodic testing. And guess what? The employer doesn't even get to choose how often you get tested. The Department of Health is going to tell them how often, okay? Because all of those things are not in conflict with the federal law. So the states can legislate where the federal government doesn't. And the federal government hasn't published standards for approving exemptions. It just says you have to provide them, and they have to say that because Title VII and the ADA and the U.S. Constitution require it. Okay, so it was very, very clever how they threaded the needle on that. Now, sure, I expect the federal government to respond somehow, right? But we have bought ourselves a lot of runway, and meanwhile, we're suing the Biden administration over all of these various mandates that they've put, in 5 different packages. So the question was, what do private employees do? Well, this is brand new. We're still sort of working our way through it, and I'm going to talk more about this afternoon. But in my 2 largest cases, suing Ascension Hospital, which is a $6 billion hospital group, the 2nd largest in the country, and we were just about to sue Disney. I know, right? This whole thing is so ridiculous, right? So you got Disney. What does Disney do? They're an entertainment company. What are they doing setting up vaccine clinics in their theme parks? I mean, how does that make any sense? They're not doctors. It's not a hospital. Anyway, both of those companies have already climbed down. Ascension Hospital was calling all day yesterday the suspended employees, asking them if they wanted to come back to work. So wrapping it up, the new law gives the Department of Health 15 days to come up with standardized exemption forms for employees to use. You don't have to use your employers. You don't have to answer all those, personal questions about your sincerely held religious beliefs anymore, and whether you took Tylenol in 1972 or whether you ever had a tetanus shot, right? That's going away. It's going to be a very simple 1-page form, I bet, and it's going to probably just say, do you have a sincerely held religious belief? And there's going to be a big box that says yes and a box that says no, and you check the box yes, and they'll probably have to take that.
Thank you so much. Okay, Doc. All right, Doc Fitz wants to say something real quick here. Let's keep it brief.
Quick. No, real fast, because I've been the guy filling out the exemptions, and they come 10 pages, and I cross out all of their stuff. Federal law, state law. I pull out the Nuremberg Code, and I put it in their exemption. I say Nuremberg number 5. Anybody that holds your job over your head and gets caught, you can be punished severely, and I send that to HCA.
I told you he was a hero. Okay. Next.
Hi, I'm Alex Cruz. My husband, Dr. Kevin Cruz, we own a couple chiropractic offices. We also host a podcast called Supernatural Junkies, where we use all of you guys' research on there. We talk about you guys constantly. This is the kind of stuff we talk about. But I have two questions today. One of them, I heard that, all vaccines will be going the route of mRNA vaccines, so this is for all of you. Have you heard that going on? And how problematic will that be when that happens? I mean, not just this one, but if all vaccines go that route. Is that a problem?
Looks like Dr. McCullough wants to jump in on this, or is it? Oh, it's the big guy. Here we go.
So, can I restate your question? As I understand your question, you're referring to this new announcement that they're going to build the billion-dose factory here in the U.S. under federal funding, and it's your belief that they're going to migrate all of the vaccines in the CDC schedule to mRNA-based products. Is that what you said?
I believe that's exactly what I said, verbatim.
So this gets into the regulatory affairs weeds. Once a vaccine is licensed, it becomes extremely difficult to roll out a new product, because you have to, the only way they could do what you're proposing is they have to completely disregard all regulatory law. And they're going to get, that's going to be a heavy lift. Yeah, I know, we're in, this gets to the totalitarianism. In normal operations, it's not economically possible to do that, because you have to run huge non-inferiority trials to show that your product is equally safe and effective or better, either in safety or efficacy, before you can get allowance to proceed with licensure for your new product. You know what, the RNA technology is not well suited to many of the bacterial vaccines and the toxin vaccines.
Okay.
It is well suited in general to viral vaccines, and it's particularly well suited for rapid response viral vaccines. But what you're kind of touching on is a central problem that the government has had repeatedly. And we've kind of been through this once under Obama, not to beat that horse. But the problem with the government's idea about building manufacturing capacity for vaccines is that they can, what they're talking about is producing a bolus amount of 1 billion doses a year for some period of time. The only way that's sustainable is you have to have an ongoing requirement for 1 billion doses a year, because you can't mothball vaccine plants. So they ran into this with the advanced development and manufacturing facilities that they spun out under Obama, and those have failed across the board. There's actually one of them in North Florida, the DoD one, and the problem is sustainability. So what they will do is, I don't think it's your fear, but it's something similar. In order to make these sustainable, this is part of why you get all the messaging, get the flu shot, get the flu shot, get the flu shot. Okay, that's not really about flu. There's actually good immunologic arguments not to do that. It has to do with the original antigenic sin and tolerizing people. But what it does is it creates a sustainable base. So they feel that the way that they need to prepare, the logic is, the way they need to ensure that they have sufficient manufacturing capacity, warm-based capacity is the word, to make it so that if we do have another outbreak, that we'll have the scalable manufacturing capacity to address that, is to create basically an artificial market. And they do that through advertising. So when you see all this messaging about get this jab or get that jab or whatever, what I predict you will see with this new initiative, well, I predict you're going to see failure, because all of these major federal initiatives to build capacity through artificial means that aren't really market-driven, they fail again and again and again, like the cell-based flu products. But they will try to create new products and generate a market through artificial means, largely through the CDC. But I doubt they're going to substitute the historic vaccines for the new vaccines, in part because pharma won't tolerate it. Because each of those vaccines represents a protected market for each of those vaccine companies, and they're not going to tolerate having those products displaced. I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, you are. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very
Can
much.
I add something to that really fast?
Yes.
So you can go on the Moderna website and see that they intend for that to be the future of medicine, right? And so we're worried about it, and you deal with people who are probably vaccine injured. And the conversation I have with people before they get the vaccine when they're making a decision is a different conversation than I have with people who have already had it, right? And I think we've all noticed that when people are in fear, they get really dumb, right? And that's the plan, right? To shrink your IQ by like 80 points and get you to do something that's really dumb. So, but when I'm talking someone out of getting it, I'm having a different conversation. I think it's really important at that point to tell them this absolutely has the potential to alter your DNA permanently. You know, and I've heard everything that these folks have to say about it, and a lot of my other colleagues too who aren't up here. And the fact of the matter is we don't know exactly what DNA changes they intend, just like we don't know every single ingredient that's in every jab, do we? Proprietary ingredients, anyone? So, but when I'm dealing with someone who's already injured, I really think that all of us need to check our motives, because probably there's a part of us that is like, damn it, I told you so, right? We're a little angry. You know, I broke down in tears when my brother, my only family member here in Florida since we moved here, we know no one, a year ago, after 6 conversations with him. The guy sold the Red Sox. He makes like $2 million a year. He's an attorney in Utah, or in Florida, of all places, self-employed, and he went out and got the jab and developed a palsy and went back and got the second jab anyway. So, and I busted into tears when he told me when we were out to dinner. I was like, could you have not done that in a public place? Anyway, so when I'm dealing with people who are already, have already made that decision, I always try to remind my audience, my public figure platforms, keep talking to them. Like, don't go into the silos. Don't let them get in the silos. Keep that love door open, because their decisions aren't over. Okay, we know that now. We now have Fauci telling us it's not a booster. It's just part of the protocol. Your 3rd shot's just part of the protocol. Stop calling it a booster. He literally just said that this week. But I think that we need to not tell them, you just screwed up your DNA for life. There's nothing you can do. I think that's one of the worst things we can do to them, because that's compounding the fear, which might be their biggest problem. And I really do think that we already know that the body does repair DNA. And I'm not saying, like, you know, give them a supplement and send them out the door and tell them it'll repair their DNA. I think that might be a little dishonest. But I do think that we can remind them, and I really am disturbed by that I think it's a Swedish study that shows that 2 of the mechanisms of action by which the body naturally repairs DNA is disabled by getting the vaccine. That's very troubling to me. However, there are many mechanisms by which the body repairs DNA, and I hope that all of us will give hope to someone who did get the 2 vaccines, because all those who will get it from here on out didn't want it, right? And a lot of the people, it may be a majority of us now, if we believe the media and the numbers, it may be a majority of us now who have gotten the vaccine. That may be true, but it's not a majority of us who wanted it. So that's just what I want to mostly say is give people hope that your body has the capacity to repair itself, and that we need to give it the right raw materials and decrease our toxic load so that it can. KF is just constantly fighting its toxic load. It really doesn't have the room to actually do the work of repairing DNA. I mean, 65% of your body's energy goes to just metabolizing your food. So give them hope.
Thank you, Robin. A quick comment.
Yeah, just real short. Dr. Malone was talking about the federal government planning for a bolus or surge in the supply of vaccines. And from a purely economic standpoint, the only reason you do that is when you anticipate a surge in demand for that product. And what I'm going to suggest to you is that the reason they're anticipating a surge in the demand for vaccines across the board is because if they get away with mandating the COVID vaccine, they will mandate every other vaccine too. Yep. Yes. Yep. And that is why we have to stop them now.
Amen.
Yeah. Last question. I recently gave blood. They made me sign several waivers and asked me several times, making sure that I didn't have the vaccine. When the phlebotomist came over, she asked me several times as well, and I asked her why. She said they were not taking blood from vaccinated people. Yes, it's disturbing to me for several reasons. I have children. If you're vaccinated, I don't know that anyone thought about if you get into an accident and you have to give blood to your child, where are you left? But then I'm also left with the question for you guys, anyone on the panel, if you do need blood and you haven't banked your blood, something to think about, everyone, for your family and yourself, what happens if you get vaccinated blood and you are unvaccinated?
That question comes up absolutely every single interview that I've done in the last year and a half, and I've done over 500. What about the blood supply? And I think it's a good question, except it always makes me scratch my head of why hasn't anybody questioned the blood supply prior to this? Has anybody ever gone out to the American Red Cross and see how dismally few things they actually screen for? And so, I mean, seriously, nobody, I mean, it's disgusting how few things they actually look for. So, but the other side of that is, and I talked to Ryan Cole about this because he's a pathologist. That's what he does, right? He donates blood. And I said, and this comes up all the time, and he said, it's a big problem. He said, because banking your blood is not possible. I mean, blood lasts, 80, 90, 120 days. So if you had an acute surgery coming up that you thought you might need blood for, you could donate your own blood to supply that. But you can't it's not like donating placenta. It's not like something, or stem cells, or embryos, that you can put them into storage for somewhere out in the future. I mean, you can't bank your blood now so that 5 years from now, if and when you're in a surgery or in a car accident, you have your blood. It doesn't happen. What Ryan said was that packed red blood cells are probably okay, because they get washed and they get kind of washed out before they're given. But if you're getting whole blood or plasma or any of those things, you're going to get B cells that have already been sensitized. And the Japanese stopped allowing vaccinated people to donate blood early on in this process, which should have been, like what Peter was talking about, a red flag that this is an issue. And so it's a big issue kind of going down the road of what you're going to get with that. And quite frankly, the powers that be that want everybody vaccinated, they probably think that's kind of cool because it's an indirect way to get the vaccine into your system.
I just want to address that real quickly. I know you got a huge line of questioners, but I organized a team of pathologists early after the vaccine program to write the Association of American Blood Banking and the American Red Cross, and then the major blood donation centers in the United States. So those letters went off expressing our concerns, and it was from a transfusion reaction that I was called on weekend, and the family member asked, could my loved one who just had a heart bypass surgery, could they have gotten a unit of blood that it was either laced with the spike protein or from a freshly vaccinated individual? And so the letters we got back from those entities said that they are aware of the problem, but they didn't mention any corrective action. So this is the first time I've heard of vaccinated people actually being declined to donate. Now the official word has been that the vaccinated do not have sufficient immunity to actually have their blood be pulled for convalescent plasma, where a naturally immune person was. And as Dr. Tenpenny mentioned, the current standard of care of screening for disease is only for like 9 diseases when you donate a unit of blood. So it's not a broad screen. So babesiosis and a few illnesses like that. What you need to know is many of the blood banking centers, they use, if you are naturally immune or not naturally immune, but you want to know, they use an antibody test, which is the orthoclinical diagnostics test, which is a little easier to hit because it's standard for positive controls, were individuals who had lesser of an antibody response compared to other ones. Other tests like Abbott, what have you, they use very, very sick people from the ICU, a tiny number of people actually in these studies to establish what was the positive control. So in a naturally immune person, I think the data I'm aware of is about 70% of people who truly have a well-documented case of COVID cannot hit an antibody test on the conventional test. So,
thank you very much, Dr. McCullough.
Can I just mention that I gave blood on Sunday, and One Blood here in Florida is taking vaccinated blood.
Okay. All right, let's take the next question. When you ask your question, please step away from the microphone and let's try to keep the answers as brief as possible. Very long line. Let's go.
My name is Jason. I work with a compounding pharmacy in various clinics around the country, and I am really concerned about the DNA repair that Dr. Tenpenny brought up, the impairment of the DNA repair caused by the spike protein. Is there any therapeutics that come to mind, or just anything that vaccinated people might benefit from? And just for the whole panel, mitochondrial damage, is that involved at all with the adverse reactions and the brain fog? Have you seen that? Thank you.
The first part is ivermectin, and then ivermectin. You know, because it globs onto the spike proteins. There's 23 different mechanisms. There's 2 papers published in the Journal of Antibiotics that were published about that. One was last year and one was this year. Of course, they said, oh, well, they really don't. I think one of them had been possibly retracted because they said it didn't give enough references. But there are at least 20 different mechanisms of how ivermectin works. It globs onto the spike proteins. It blocks the ACE2 receptors from the spike proteins binding to the cells. It blocks the transmission of the spike proteins into the place if you have the full virus in terms of replication. So there's lots of different ways to do that. I think that vitamin D is really super important. You know, more than 90% of people that are hospitalized really are vitamin D deficient. We target our vitamin D in the office for those levels to be somewhere between 80 and 100. I know people that go greater than that, up to about 125. I've heard people that have had their MS symptoms mitigated if they've got their vitamin D3 levels up, or their 2-hydroxy vitamin D levels up around 150. So I think vitamin D, vitamin C is really important. We do know that the spike proteins, and part of the long haul syndrome, part of the spike proteins is they're taken up by the monocytes, and so they're sort of delivered everywhere. There was a paper, several different papers I'm going to talk about this afternoon, that show that the antibodies to the spike proteins can cross-react with up to 28 different tissue types. One of them is the inner lining of the mitochondria. And so part of my opinion and what I've seen is that a lot of people that that don't completely clear the virus if they've got real COVID from SARS-CoV-2, or that have monoclonal antibodies that are going around and attacking their mitochondria, is part of the long-haul fatigue syndrome, because what does the mitochondria actually do? It's your energy centers. It's the place that makes your ATP. So we address that with high doses of omega-3s and high doses of CoQ10. That those two things feed the mitochondria and help them to start to recover. And so I think that those are the things that there isn't anything that's like a magnet that sucks it all out, but I think part of that actually helps.
Looks like Dr. Malone has a comment.
Yeah, Dr. Tenpenny, I'm a little uncomfortable with a number of the things that have been said here. I just want to be clear on that. As a physician and a scientist, it's important to recognize that there are phenomena that can be observed in specific experiments under controlled conditions. And those phenomena may or may not translate into something that is clinically significant. So as the guy that came up with this tech and has been deeply involved in building these types of delivery platforms, including self-replicating RNA, I'm intimately familiar with the fact that they are incredibly inefficient. So that's been one of the big frustrations in this field, is if we could correct inborn errors of metabolism in the pediatric population, we would be doing it. We can't. The efficiency of delivery is incredibly low. That's why these technologies are being used for vaccines, because the immune response amplifies the biologic effect of very small amounts of protein being produced. So when we read about the possibility of the effects, for instance, of expression of reverse transcriptase and the integration of RNA that's been reverse transcribed into DNA, it may be possible to detect that in a laboratory situation, and there's a notable paper in PNAS early on that shows this by a well-respected retrovirologist who has a long history of reporting interesting observations that have absolutely no clinical significance. So from my standpoint, I'm excruciatingly aware of how inefficient these systems are. They deliver, it's true they deliver to a broad range of cell types in your body. It's true that those cell types are not well characterized. It's true that the duration and levels of protein produced are not well characterized. These things should have all been done, but that doesn't equate to the logic that the majority or even a tiny minority of your cells are being transduced or transfected, depending on the delivery system, using these technologies. So we hear about a lot of these things that can happen in some laboratory experiments, in some conditions. That does not equate to whether or not they are clinically significant. And I'm trying to emphasize that we need to be really cautious about leaping from a laboratory observation to a conclusion of clinical significance to the development of a potential treatment for that without ever demonstrating that it's actually happening. And these issues about genomic effects and integration and disruption of signal transduction pathways and DNA repair pathways and potential interactions with mitochondria that can be demonstrated in a laboratory environment does not mean that is the mechanism. We already have plenty of mechanisms of action. We know some very clear clinical signals. And Peter can list those and the manuscripts behind him in the clinic that are clinically significant. We don't have to go hunting for zebras. These products do cause blood clotting. They do cause microcoagulopathy. They probably are causing immune complex formation, particularly in those that are naturally recovered and then get vaccinated. The vaccines do produce a bolus of protein. That protein is a modified spike. It's not the native spike, just so we're clear on that. That doesn't mean that it's not toxic. What it means is that it's slightly different, 2 amino acids different, and once again, the FDA did not do its job and force the vaccine manufacturers to demonstrate that the modified spike protein is safe. So all these things can be true at the same time, but I caution you about leaping from a observation reported in a manuscript in a controlled laboratory environment to inferring clinical significance and then treating that effect. We have plenty to go on. We have plenty of ways to treat the coagulopathy and many of the other effects, and there's others that are still a mystery. Luc Montagnier was talking to me yesterday about 5 different cases of ALS in France that they're hunting down right now that seem to be temporally associated with the vaccine. We don't know whether those are related or not, but I just really, I'm sitting here kind of gritting my teeth a little bit. Please don't jump straight from a published manuscript using a controlled laboratory test, often involving cell culture or transgenic animals, to concluding that this is in fact the mechanism when we don't have to hunt zebras. We got plenty of horses out there. There's plenty of mechanisms of action that are well demonstrated. And that's, forgive me for saying this, Dr. Tenpenny, but I think we do need to be really cautious about drawing conclusions about laboratory observations that may or may not be clinically significant until we demonstrate that they are. Over.
Okay, people, what you just saw is debate. So this is what should be happening right now at the World Health Organization and the CDC and the FDA, and it is not.
I'm gonna make one statement, and I'm gonna defer to Larry. You said you've got to be cautious to not defer to that. I would say I'm treating patients clinically, and you say it may not be true. Well, it may also be true.
Thank you. Let's try to move on to another
Kevin,
question. All right, Dr. Palevski, go ahead.
I just want to also say that we do not know what ingredients are in these shots. We do not know the full ingredients. So we know that there's something called PEG. We know that there's something called a lipid nanoparticle, but we don't know what else is in there. No one is overseeing their manufacturing process enough, and they're not willing to give us the full list of ingredients in there. So in an ideal world, I probably would say, yeah, maybe the messenger RNA does operate the way you're speaking, but we don't know what else is in there to know whether it's operating the way you're speaking, because the tests and the studies have not been done appropriately before we gave these shots.
I just want to say one thing real quickly, that I take my oath very seriously. I think every life is so sacred, and I stay up at night all the time thinking if I've done the right thing. And that means I research everything. I look at every differential diagnosis. I look at every potential risk-benefit ratio. I look at every potential side effect. And so we need to look at everything, even the zebras, because we've been mistaken before in the past many times. We can go through the list of how the FDA has approved many things, and it's been disastrous. And so we should never throw caution out the window here for the sake of science, okay, in the laboratory. And just so you know, we do need to look at the reverse transcriptase enzyme, because it can take up a gene and take it up into the genome. It's been proven.
Okay, on the RT story. So yes, we do have endogenous proviruses throughout our genome. They've been there for millennia. If reverse transcriptase and reintegration was a major problem, your genomes would be loaded with influenza sequences. They're not. You're infected by a wide range of RNA viruses, including beta coronaviruses. The sequences from those viruses are not found in your genome. Those viruses are much more efficient at delivering RNA into your cells than these vaccines are. I'm absolutely not saying the vaccines are perfectly safe. They aren't. Okay, don't get me wrong. But the reverse transcriptase issue, as somebody who is deeply steeped in retrovirology, if that was truly a problem, your genomes would all be loaded with RNA sequences from other viruses. And they're not.
Can we all agree, though, could all of us agree that there are other ingredients besides the mRNA that we should be deeply concerned about and that injured us? How many of you are injured from vaccines before you ever heard of an mRNA vaccine? We agree on that, do we not?
Well, I just want to make a quick comment, as maybe I'm kind of in between the two forces here. Some of you have heard that lead attorney Adam Seary has sued the FDA for the Pfizer dossier, and there's a named panel of experts to review the data. I'm one of the panelists, so I'm aware of the suit. And the FDA, in response to our suit, asked a federal judge to delay the release of the entire dossier until 2076. And I can tell you, I'm 58. I'm not going to make it to 2076 to review the dossier, which it was disclosed is over 390,000 pages. And some of the work I do in our data safety reports, it can be 14,000 pages or so. So I'm not afraid of the page count, but I am afraid of the duration they've asked for. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because as Jay Bhattacharya, myself and others, our frequent contributors, Dr. Malone, to Fox News, we have told America multiple times our public health agencies have lost our trust. It's because of actions like that. I mean, that is a clear court action where they don't want to tell Americans something until 2076, but they want you to take the vaccine now.
My name is Dr. Catherine Anoha. I own a little medical clinic, private one in Lakeland, Florida. And we dabble there in a little bit autoimmune, a little bit hormone adjustment, but my area of specialization is psych and neuro. And I have a sad story because my family has all been drinking the Kool-Aid. And I told them with all my heart, please do not take this vaccine. They all did. And I lost a sister on September 12th this year. So it's very fresh on me. And I paid for the autopsy. And the autopsy said lymphocytic myocarditis. She had gotten Moderna. But my question, and I know I just said I specialize in psych, my question is, how can I couch this sequel event? Because all of my family completely changed. I come from a family of overeducated, over-idealistic, ethical people, and everything that has happened since she died, including they got our family public enemy #1, who we've been suing for 5 years, to pay her funeral. They dropped the lawsuit. They ostracized me. I'm outcast. I'm the only other medical person in our family is a nurse. She's now the boss queen. My mother's not talking to me. I have lost all family bonds. And I probably will have other people to counsel through that situation. And it goes 50 years of lost trust bonds is kind of a lot to handle. And if I can't handle it, I can't help other people to handle it. So it feels to me like my family got the invasion of the body snatcher reaction, like really, like they're gone. I don't recognize any of their reactions. The IQ piece is totally true. They don't talk to me. They seem so clueless. And I can't compartmentalize any sense out of this. So if anyone has an answer.
Just quickly, I'm a cardiologist, and I'm also very concerned about myocarditis. And let me just say that the myocarditis of the non-fatal syndromes and fatal syndromes is the one that's fully recognized by the FDA and the CDC in the deliberations in June, okay? So what's happening is people are taking a vaccine in the face of a warning that says the vaccine can cause this problem. If your sister would have died of a fatal cavernous venous thrombosis after Johnson & Johnson, the FDA also says that. If your loved one died of Guillain-Barré syndrome after Johnson & Johnson, the FDA also says this. I mean, one of the things you can default back to, you can see in this cloud of fear and confusion, the regulatory agencies in some ways are trying to warn Americans. So you can take this and say, listen, this isn't just my opinion. The FDA is trying to warn you. Heed these warnings appropriately. The concern is, of these fatal cases, of whatever it is, it's possible there is an underlying predisposition. In the setting of heart failure and fatal cardiomyopathies, there's a potential for genetic predisposition. There are mutations in titin and other major genes in the heart that when there is an injury, it goes on to become a fulminant and fatal injury. So you have some avenues with your family to say, listen, we've already lost one loved one. We keep going for these boosters, more could go down. There may be something in our family line that leads towards this. You can actually try to take something that's just horrific and try to turn it into something positive in the future. The great concern, there's been this initial concern of, okay, who took the vaccine? Well, we're already at 60% of Americans, 80% of our seniors have taken the vaccine. But now it's expired, basically. Most people are in expiration phase, and now the next issue is, do they take a booster? And hopefully there's a chance to repair relationships. And you can defer a bit to the regulatory agencies and say, listen, everything I learned about this at this symposium, this may not be the last tragedy we face with vaccination in our family.
Well.
Oh.
There's a great family counselor. I'd like to give you his name.
Okay.
He's local.
Okay. I'll tell you, say one other thing. Our churches failed us miserably on the front end of this. They closed the doors when we were supposed to get together and pray. They never were there to support any of the early deaths that happened from real SARS-CoV-2 infection. And they are, but they closed their doors to prayer and congregation, but they opened their doors on Tuesday afternoon to create a shot clinic. I implore all of you, and the few of you, thank God, that are here that are pastors, and take this back to your pastors. Don't fail us on the back end of this. This woman is in her story, this doctor's story, about the waves of grief that are going to be coming, from the deaths that are going to happen from these shots and these side effects, from the deaths in the children that we're going to start seeing that's going to be happening. Our churches have got to spiritually be there to support us while we're going through this grief process.
So, I'd like to say something from a child development perspective and brain development. The front brain develops because we have experiences and we have ownership of our experiences and our knowledge. What we're seeing in our culture today is a front brain that's developed because of information that's coming from the outside. So we are being downloaded with things that we trust and believe in without taking ownership of the process ourselves. And so we're stuck because we have a hindbrain that's very dominant in fear, and we have a forebrain that's very dominant in I know, but not because you know, because you went through knowing. You know because somebody told you, and then you said, I know. What we're missing is midbrain development. And midbrain development requires curiosity, it requires compassion, and it requires an ability to share your experience as valid without begging or needing anyone else to agree with you, but to be able to say, this is my experience. Are you willing to listen that I had an experience different than you? And the entry, I do this with kids all the time, because you watch parents who give kids orders and they don't listen. But if you speak to the midbrain, if you speak to, I understand that that's how you feel, but I feel differently. So you create shared experiences where I validate your experience. Are you going to validate my experience? Because mine is real. And so we have to start looking at each other as valid experiences, not hierarchical relationships where I'm smarter and you're dumber. And this is hard. This requires hard work.
Dr. Malone, did you have a quick comment?
Can I say one more thing to you, and that is that I see you and I feel your pain, and it's mind-blowing. I don't think your story's over. I think where you are with your family right now is not where you'll be in a year. And then your big challenge may be forgiveness. That's all.
Can I take a moment? So, I don't know about you, I use intellectualization as a defense mechanism all the time. And you're kind of in the, how do I cope with this, is what I heard. So, there's a professional colleague of yours that you probably don't know. He's in the University of Ghent. His name is Matthias Desmet. And I strongly recommend that you look him up. He's having a lot of impact on a lot of us that are trying to comprehend the why of the behavior, the crowd behavior, okay? And the term that you want to look up is mass formation psychosis. And I think as a professional, you may appreciate what Matthias is sharing with us. We are dealing with a situation of a form of the madness of crowds. And there is a fraction of the population, a substantial fraction, that has undergone something very akin to hypnosis. And you cannot break through that. And it's not your fault, okay? And often the highly educated are highly susceptible to this. Okay, so thank you for sharing your story, and I just wanted to give you this name and encourage you to look up. Matthias has got a book that's going to come out shortly. I've spoken to him a few times. Bobby Kennedy has sat down and spoken to him, other colleagues, including Peter, I think. And so if intellectualization can help you to cope and recognize that it's not you, it is your sense that they're a little bit mad, perhaps, is valid. And if you look up Matthias, you'll find him on YouTube and other places. They're not taking him down yet. It may help you. And for all of us that are grappling with I don't get it. How come they're not seeing this thing? So that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, we gotta move on to the next question. That was important though, because people are going to have to go through grief, and it's going to happen. Next question. Try to keep it brief. The answers also.
My name is Larry, and I just want to thank the panel for being here. It's been mentioned that inflammation and neurological symptoms occur for people who have had COVID. And I want to know if anyone on the panel, or more than one, has organizations or medical facilities that deal with the symptoms for people whose symptoms persist after they've had COVID, who are called long haulers. Is there any resources available for that?
So I strongly recommend, in my opinion, the leader in this is Dr. Bruce Patterson. And he's a board-certified pathologist. He has an extensive diagnostic panel. There's a number of agents that he's piloted for intervening. And rumor has it that he actually treated Gavin Newsom. He would not confirm that rumor. So there are groups. The NIH supposedly threw a lot of money at it. I haven't seen anything come out of that expenditure. But Bruce Patterson, MD, pathologist, he's got a company. Look him up and get in touch with him. He has a testing panel and differentiates I've experienced long COVID for a long period of time from my first infection, so I empathize with this. And I had CNS symptoms, among other things. So Bruce, I think, is your go-to right now, and perhaps is the go-to for the entire United States right now, if that's helpful.
Thank you. Let's take another question, please, from the next person, if we have time.
Was there anyone else have any?
I'll just say quickly, Patterson's working on the diagnostic side. Two programs I'm aware of. One is by Al Johnson in Dallas. That's an integrative program, and he's doing very creative things. Obviously, there are no randomized trials of dealing with long COVID or dealing with the post-vaccine injury syndromes, and actually they may have some parallelisms that those two groups of patients go together. The other one is Michael Robb in Phoenix, but they are systematically trying to address prolonged pulmonary injury, the neurologic, pleural pericardial, musculoskeletal, kind of neuropsychiatric aspects of the problem. So it's a brand new area of research. I agree with Dr. Malone. We clearly need, I think if the National Institutes of Health would recognize these conditions exist and we see real granting mechanisms, we can start to get to randomized trials of them. I imagine it'll be with agents that have some type of fundamental multi-system effect. I doubt that it's going to be single drug, single mechanism that's going to make a difference.
Okay, we just have a couple minutes left.
Thank you so much to the panel for being so inspiring to all of us here today. I'm part of a small group of nurses that are dedicated to the FLCCC protocol, networking and promoting early treatment. There's a small group of us, maybe 5 of us, that are trying to get in the fight a bigger way. We're studying to become nurse practitioners so that we can join the movement as independent practitioners. However, we are finding it difficult to find mentors that aren't requiring the experimental injection. How do we encourage more health practitioners to mentor the up-and-coming health practitioners to expand our movement in health, as health practitioners be dedicated to truth, evidence-based medicine, and personalized care rather than big pharma? Thank you.
Local, you're local. You're local.
I'm from Minnesota, but I drove down here to see you guys.
Well, yeah. I trained at Michigan State. and I came to Florida to do a surgery rotation, and they scooped me up and kept me here. So I'm a Yankee that came down and stayed. If you can, Dr. Fitzgerald, Dr. Fitz, for 28 years, I've been teaching interns, residents, students. So you can come and do rotations with me. Tell all your friends, I accept students, interns, residents. Okay.
Excellent. Next question.
All right, so my question is going to be quick. So as a civilian, I go to church, I go to the grocery store, and it's like, no matter where you go, you're always going to find people who've taken the vaccine, who've taken the booster shots. I haven't because I didn't want to. But, so you're surrounded by all those, and based on what I've been hearing and based on what I understand, it's like the vaccinated folks have quite a bit of viral load, so it's like even just by going about your daily life, you still get the chance of getting caught with it. So it's like, all right, as a civilian, what do you do? Like, how do you function in daily life? Because I don't think becoming a hermit is the answer, but there's got to be something I can do to at least protect myself.
The most important recognition is that only symptomatic people essentially spread the virus. So whether someone's vaccinated or not, if someone isn't red hot with symptoms, we don't have to worry. We don't have to treat each other like lepers, vaccinated, unvaccinated. You're right. I'll show the papers today that, in this kind of incipient phase of COVID-19, when people are coming down with symptoms and getting testing, the viral loads, as we'd infer from the psychothresholds, are equal among the vaccinated or unvaccinated. So this idea that that there's a differential in public health threat is not substantiated. What you need to know is just the smartest thing we can do, which we didn't do in years previously, is when we're sick, stay home. When we feel like we're going to get sick, get out of work, and employers need to be flexible in letting employees, schools need to be flexible in having students go home. That's the smartest thing we can do, as opposed to try to segregate and make these inferences on vaccinated, unvaccinated.
Peter, can you address that study that came out of Vietnam about the 251 times increased load?
So there's been a series of papers, I'm not going to show them today, but one by Chow, one by Hetemaki, and one by Keener. Keener's in New England Journal of Medicine, all showing among healthcare workers, of which there have never been any major health system outbreaks, by the way. The healthcare workers of concern that really did spread COVID were nursing home workers, and those was early on in the pandemic. But of health system and hospital workers, there never have been any major outbreaks. But those three studies do show among the vaccinated that, in fact, they do get COVID-19, they acquire it, and they clearly spread it to others. In lockdown situations, researchers have shown they can actually sequence the virus. They know who transmitted what, who to whom, and in a lockdown situation, it's clear the vaccine is not providing any protection within a healthcare worker population. In fact, the Keener paper from University of California at San Diego shows that there were actually more Delta infections among the vaccinated than unvaccinated. Granted, it was a larger population of nurses and workers who took the vaccine. But the point is, again, I'm making a strong case scientifically to, under no circumstances, have any vaccine discrimination, nor have any discriminatory thoughts. And that's kind of what your question was, is should I have a discriminatory thought one in another? And I think that this is the strongest message you can give back to your healthcare provider colleagues, is not to do this. We've heard horrible stories about doctors throwing patients out of their waiting room if they haven't been vaccinated. I've had distress calls of patients that say that my doctors aren't going to take care of me unless I take the vaccine. And we actually have to find strategies to get that out of our operating principles with one another.
I think I heard an undertone of fear of this virus in you. Okay, yeah, and in many of you. So there's a survey out that like half the population thinks that they get this thing, they're going to die. I've had it twice. Bona fide, had it twice. I was in the very first wave with Biogen. Still here, still breathing, still feed the horses in the morning, have an active life, had a great walk on the beach. Point is, your risk of hospitalization and death unless you have major pre-existing conditions or you're one of the high-risk groups in terms of the age bracket, your risk is a fraction of a percent. If you've been previously infected or vaccinated, this very large studies from Israel show that your risk of death is virtually zero. So one of the things we're dealing with mass formation psychosis is the obsessive belief that this represents a threat that is far, the belief is the threat is much, much more severe than it actually is. And so if I can give you that in all of us, just recognize, for most of us, this is not something that we have to fear. And for the high-risk groups, there are physicians, some notable examples here. What the lesson learned is, as Peter was saying, as soon as you get the symptom, get treated. And then that risk goes way, way down. So that's all I wanted to say is, it's a core message. Don't be driven by fear here. Don't let the fear drive you crazy.
Thank you. Yeah, that was one of the reasons that you were here today is to get rid of the fear and to gain more knowledge. I hope we've accomplished that. It is 11 o'clock. That clock up there is not correct. We have to cut it off. Thank all of these people for being here today. Okay. Thanks. I hope to see you.